Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everyone into Garden of Doom, and this week we have one of our returning favorites. Who knew this when I found him, that he would be so popular with all of you? But he is, and people love the subject of Mesoamerica and of Mexico in particular, and the paranormal and the history and the myths and mythology and everything. And so we have Robert Bitto from Suenos International coming to us. And today, so listen, first of all, we're having a little bit of a tech issue where he can barely hear me. Luckily enough, the topic today is the Olmec, and I know nothing about it. Almost nothing. Practically, all I know is the stuff of legend. That basically it's the North American version of Atlantis, or ancient Egypt, whatever. It's the answer to all the lost technology in the world. And what I saw on the kids game show Legend of the Temple. No, my kids watched it. That's how old I am. So, and Mike Murphy, who was a comedian, like, before that and after that, I think that actually saved his career. He's doing better now. Anyway, enough of that. Robert, how are you? Welcome into Garden of Doom again.
Yes, thanks for having me again. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today.
Yeah, no, I do as well. And just so if we did the Aztec show a few months ago. It was very well received. And originally we were going to do the Maya chronologically first, but Robert had to reschedule, so we rescheduled to this date. Actually, we were going to do the Olmec chronologically earlier, but Robert had to reschedule, which was fine, to this date, and we had the Maya scheduled. He's like, hey, do you mind if we do the Olmec first? Because that makes more sense. I said, I don't mind at all. Actually, I prefer that. So wonderful. I just didn't want to cut off on whatever he was preparing for. So we will do the Maya at some point in the future, probably a few months down the road, because we don't like to, we like to bounce around in Garden of Doom. But without further ado, Robert, tell us about the Olmec. Well, first tell us about yourself and then about the Olmec.
Well, I run a podcast and a YouTube channel called Mexico Unexplained, and I've published 3 books in the Mexico Unexplained series: Mexican Monsters, Mexican Miracles, and the original book Mexico Unexplained. And I also have a coloring book that goes hand in hand with the Monsters book. So in case you're an adult colorer or you have little kids, the Monsters book is kind of fun to have that coloring book to go with it. And I have had a lot of experience in Mexico for a gringo anyway. I used to work down there at a major U.S. company's head office in Mexico City. I was a student down there for a while, and I've owned an import company since 1999. This year will be 25 years that I've been importing things from Mexico, and I've traveled all over the country. And I've heard a lot of strange and interesting stories, and that was the genesis of the whole Mexico Unexplained project, was my experience with everything to do with Mexico. And I noticed that there wasn't much being talked about in the English-speaking world about all these strange and interesting things that I've been seeing over the course of like over 30 years now. So that's a bit of my background.
Robert, I have a question for you, and it's really personal to me. My wife is from Ecuador, and she calls me a gringo. And I said to her, we're here. We're in the United States of America. I'm not a gringo here. I'm a gringo if I go south of the Rio Grande, and in your case, south of the Isthmus of Panama. I mean, you don't get to call me a gringo here. And she says, yes, I do. What? Am I right or wrong here?
You want me to get in between this little domestic thing here? No. Anyway, well, no, it depends, really. It depends on the country. It depends on, the group of people. Whatever. Gringo is just a blanket term for anyone from the United States. And you don't necessarily have to be white either. And it can apply, sad to say, on this side of the border, on our side of the border.
So she is technically correct. So technically, she's correct. And as far as being white is, as far as color is concerned, I am builder's neutral 1. I am the color that comes on unfinished houses on the inside. So, basically, okay. Well, thank you for that, even though it didn't go my way. All right. So, over 4 years, 3-4 years, whatever it's been that I've been doing the show, the audience needs to get a little bit of me in it, so that at some point they actually start to like me. I think that might help in the growth and retention of the show. But anyway, back to the Olmec, and if I listen to shows on ancient civilizations or whatever, this is generally how the Olmec are described: is they were always here, they sprang out of nowhere and disappeared into nowhere.
That's kind of right.
Oh, well.
Well.
All right, the end. Thanks, Robert.
Okay. I'll give you the non-Chat GPT version of this.
Excellent.
So the Olmecs are a mysterious people. Yeah, they sprung out of nowhere. And with a lot of civilizations throughout the world, agriculture, irrigation, resource scarcity usually leads to organized settlements and people settling down, and the need for infrastructure, and then the need for rulership to oversee everything. So what was happening is people were settling down in the tropical lowlands of the Gulf Coast of Mexico, the modern day states of Veracruz and Tabasco. Mm-hmm. And this was starting around 1200 BC.
Was Van Halen going there at the time? Sammy Hagar, was he going to Cabo Wabo at the time, or is this pre Van Halen? Because they're very old.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so 1200 BC to about 400 BC. That's 800 years of their heyday. There was a phase before that called the Epi-Olmec, which of course means before the Olmec, where there were little villages. But the social stratification, the specialization of tasks, artisans and farmers, and the division of labor, that started around 1200 BC. And there was one big city that emerged in the western part of what they call the Olmec heartland, called San Lorenzo. And that was the big powerhouse for about 300 years. And then for the rest of the 500 years, the power center shifted to the eastern part of the Olmec heartland, to a city called La Venta, and that declined around 400 BC, and the city was abandoned, and basically the Olmec civilization collapsed. Now, there's not a whole lot we know about this civilization because it was so old, and one of the major sites, La Venta, was, well, they're all in the tropics, but La Venta, because it wasn't close to any stone quarry areas or any access to durable building materials, they built the city out of earth and clay. So it pretty much disintegrated, except for the few stone structures that they had there. And the Olmecs had a very primitive writing system that wasn't used very extensively. So we have like little pieces of their writing system, which is just a baby step above like pictographs or petroglyphs that you would see. And that laid the foundation basically for the Maya civilization's writing system. The Olmecs are called the mother civilization of Mesoamerica because they were recognized as the first civilized, settled down, stratified society. And so a lot of the civilizations that came after them had borrowed some stuff that they had originated and built upon that. So, yeah, there is a lot of information about the Olmecs, but there's a lot that's lacking too. So there's a lot left to learn, and there are not very many sites. And because of the age and where this civilization was located in the tropics, it's hard to come by a lot of the stuff that's left behind.
So, Robert, pretty much every culture that we know about has some story about somebody who came and taught them poetry, farming, agriculture, tool making, music, warfare. Basically the legend of Atlantis, they spread all over the place. But, Atlantis, given where it was supposed to be, it's unlikely they made it to the west coast shores of Mexico, even if you believe in the Atlantis story. And unlike Atlantis, the Olmec is objectively true. I mean, we know that these people actually exist. They're legendary, but they're not the stuff of legend. They're stuff of fact. But I just want to establish a couple things that are probably obvious, but the names of the cities you gave, those are the modern names. We don't know the names that the Olmec gave their own cities, do we?
That's correct. So, because their writing system wasn't really developed, in the Maya region, we know maybe about half of what the Maya called their own cities. We still have some Spanish names connected with the Maya, but for the Olmecs, we have just Spanish names.
Right. When you hear San something, obviously that's Saint something, and there were no saints until after Christianity. So,
Right. San Lorenzo is Saint Lawrence.
Right.
And La Venta is like a sail. Maybe you've seen that in Spanish bodegas or whatever. The venta means sail, but it's also from an older Spanish word meaning like a stopover place or an inn, but that's not used anymore. But hundreds of years ago, when they named the area La Venta, it meant like the stopover instead of the sail.
Do you know the word for in that they used, where caravans stopped and they sort of had these little flea markets and inns and taverns? It's like a really hard word. It's like caravanserai or something. But I guess it's is it sort of like the equivalent, basically like a trade town, on the route, like not a major, or maybe it is a major, but a town that was built around trade routes.
As far as La Venta goes, and the name applied to the town that's nearby, the ruins. The ruins themselves, there was some trade going on there, and it was a big religious center. There was a lot of wealth there, so the wealth was flowing in from somewhere. some of it was generated there, but trade routes did end up there. They must have, because it was a major city.
I may be conflating what different cultures considered valuable and timelines and entire geographies, but isn't it that in this part of Mexico they had a lot of availability of certain feathers and purple dye from, I think, snails or squids or some sort of shell that was, purple sort of has always been considered like royalty everywhere because it's so rare to find, and apparently this is the area that had it. So even if they didn't consider it special, it's like Budweiser. It's not special here, but it's imported other places, and then it's a premium. Like in like Europe and everywhere else, like Mercedes are all over the goddamn place. They're the taxis, but here Mercedes is like a super status symbol. Did the availability of like purple dyes and certain plumage and colored feathers have anything to do with their wealth, or is it just wild speculation?
Well, as far as I know, the purple dye, I believe it comes from an insect called cochineal. I'm not sure though, and I could be pronouncing it incorrectly. But as far as in the Olmec area, their luxury goods were jade and polished obsidian, like mirrors. And in the Olmec art, you can see kings wearing mirrors around their necks, like in necklaces.
Can we pause there for a second? Because I listen to a lot of shows and see a lot of websites and things pop up on my feeds. And anybody who's interested in these areas, probably you get the same thing. And I've heard time and time again that there's proof that there was pan-Pacific trade because jade comes from China, and we didn't have, and there was no jade in North or South America. And well, you just saw there's jade. There was jade there. I'd be happy to learn that there was trade between what is now China and what is now Mexico. But it sounds like jade is indigenous, if that's the right term for a precious stone, to Mexico.
You are correct, and in fact, I was on a Maya dig in the year 1997, and I actually uncovered a piece of jade in the dig that we were at.
Nice.
In situ, as they say. So I found it myself. So yeah, jade was highly prized, and in the Olmecs, it was an important part of their status, to show their status of their wealth. And they made it into necklaces, little carvings. So it was widely used all the way up until when the Spanish arrived. So in all civilizations in Mexico.
So one myth busted right there.
Let me add a little bit to that.
Sure.
I did a show actually about China having contact with the Olmec area, because there were a lot of theories about this gigantic fleet of ships that left China near the same time that this civilization came out of nowhere. And some people have looked at these figurines, even some of the jade carvings, and they look very Asiatic. But the Olmecs, it's interesting because you have people claiming they're from Africa. You have people claiming that they Chinese or East Asians seeded that civilization. The Polynesian connection, even though it's not, the homeland is not on the Pacific coast, it's the Gulf of Mexico. So, it's on the eastern side of the country. But you have all of these people claiming that this is the origin, that's the origin. And that's what happens when you have a big void, when you have a big mystery. People come in and fill the void with whatever pet theory they have. And that oftentimes hinders our understanding of what the civilization was really like.
Well, let's try and help that a little bit, because there's no dispute in the scientific community that the Americas were initially populated by Asians. They crossed Beringia, the Bering Strait, from basically what is now Siberia, but it was much broader at the time, probably going down all the way into what's now the Korean Peninsula, and they crossed into the Americas, and some by land, and now a lot of people are basically it's all but confirmed that also people came by water following sort of the edge of the glaciation or the coastline, hugging the coastline. And it's also all but confirmed that there were at least some people from, what you now call Polynesia, Australia, Oceania coming, because the water levels were much lower. There were many more islands. The islands that now dot there were much larger. Some might have even been continental in size or small countries, and that there might have been some crossing over into South America, Peru, Chile, what have you, and some of those folks probably migrated north. So there may in fact be, but all of those peoples did, even if you got as far as Australia, they came from what is now Asia. It's just a question of when they actually went there, when they went, what kind of differentiation in physical traits had evolved by that time, because it's all about geology and geography and weather and environment. I mean, as I understand it, all humans had more or less the same skin color until, something like 40 or 50,000 years ago. Now, I'm sure that's subject to change, but yeah, I mean, of course they looked Asian because they were. There's the DNA has proved that all of our first nations in the Americas are, it's basically colonized, by Asia, and then they colonize themselves over and over again. I guess when there's nobody else here, it's migration. But then again, if the reptilians and the ant people were here first, we did colonize them. So those poor reptilians and ant people, no wonder they're mad at us.
Well, and then I think we've touched on this before. There's a whole other sort of fringe, I hate to use that word, I shouldn't have said that. There's a whole other group of people who believe that the Olmecs were Africans based on the facial features on the colossal stone heads, the famous big gigantic heads. And those big gigantic heads have big lips and broad noses. But the features are somewhat exaggerated because, and this caused a person to get very angry at me in the comment section. She was like, "What? Exaggerated features? What are you talking about?" And the eyes are bigger too. So not only are the noses and the lips bigger, the eyes are bigger too. So, there's a little bit of artistic license with these gigantic sculptures, but all through the tropical areas of the world, you see people with broader noses and bigger lips. You go to the Philippines or Southeast Asia, you have the noses that are closer to the face and broader. And in Africa, and then also in tropical Mexico. And the people who are living there now in Tabasco and Veracruz, the native peoples who were there, look like the artistic renditions of the ancients. So
So it's probably just a rendition of what the people there actually look like, but we can't rule out that it was something else. But Occam's razor would say. Now, I've heard on those, whenever you see giant statues, you think of, Easter Island, and you think it must be gods and kings and whatnot. But I believe that the belief now, or the working theory that is the majority opinion, which doesn't make it true, it's a theory, but is that they were basically sports heroes, that there was some sort of sports contest that basically the kings and the royalties and the nobility played for, and it was almost like their version of civilized war, and that these were the sports heroes. It's like the Rocky statue, or in real life, like, Michael Jordan or Johnny Unitas, here in Baltimore. I'm sure there's Kobe Bryant in Los Angeles. I'm sure there's a LeBron James in Miami, or there will be. I mean, Miami and Cleveland. Well, Miami probably too. Anyway, I'm probably showing my ignorance as to where statues are, but basically these might have been the sports heroes, which may have been the same as the actual heroes, the leaders, the nobility, the generals, the warriors. whatnot. The basically, they didn't have TMZ and People magazine then, so they made giant head statues of the heroes in real time, or as close as real time as you could. Is there anything to that?
That's a fringe theory.
Oh, it's a fringe theory. Okay.
Yeah, and I would like to think that yours truly came up with it.
Oh,
because, nice. And I think I mentioned this on another show of yours way back when we talked about this, but it's generally believed that these colossal heads were from kings, renditions of kings or gods, and that's a purely academic take on things. And a lot of academics are just narrow in their focus on believing or thinking about things. So if it's big, it must be something to do with a king or a god.
Right.
Well, like what you were explaining, sports figures are very important in our culture. In like the Roman times, we had a Roman emperor whose son, Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, his son, Commodus, fancied himself a gladiator. Why? Because gladiators were more popular than the ruling class. And you look now in our country, who's more popular, LeBron James or Joe Biden?
Yeah, for sure.
Who's more popular, Tom Brady or Pope Francis? I mean, we know. So if we go back to the Olmecs,
we are more likely to have a statue of Brad Pitt than Joe Biden. That's for sure.
So if we go back to the Olmecs, and this is what I don't understand. When I don't know if I'm the only one who's come up with this. I think I mentioned it on your show, and what you described as these people, these statues being representatives of sports heroes. I don't know if I'm the only one that has said that.
You might be the first, but you're definitely not the only, because I've heard it other places. And I know that you did bring it up way back when, but I've heard it on Earth Ancients, not just from the host Cliff Dunning, who was on this show, I think episode 50, so thank you, Cliff, but some of his guests. It's been said, by more than one.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because the true academics will not say that.
Okay.
And to me, it's really bizarre because there are 17 of these heads that we know of, and every single one of those heads has a ball game helmet on. It's like a football helmet almost. It looks like, one for the Gip, or, an old football helmet from the 30s, the 1930s.
Like the leather helmets.
So why would you dress up a god in a helmet for the ball game? It kind of doesn't make sense.
Well, if those were their helmets when they were aliens coming down, it could have been their alien helmets.
Right. Yeah, hey, why not?
I mean, that's a fringe theory. And that, in fact, that is a theory that is out there, that they were like their space helmets.
Right, yeah. And so I'm inclined, because academics, like I said, they have a narrow focus on things. When you look at things from the outside, like I always do, you get ridiculed. Like when I was on that dig, for example, where I discovered that piece of jade along with hundreds of pottery pieces and stuff, we were talking about the Chultun, which is a depressed area. It looks like it could be a water cistern, but sometimes the Chultuns, they're about 6 feet deep. They're circular. They almost look like kivas from the Four Corners area. That's New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and Utah. Our last show.
Mm-hmm.
I clarified that.
Good memory.
So the Four Corners area with kivas, which are circular rooms that are set inside the earth. Chultuns in the Maya area were similar to this. And some of them have graffiti and markings on them from the ancient times. And when I was on this dig as a volunteer in Belize, I said to the guy overseeing the little section that we were in called Chan Kahal, I said, well, couldn't these Chultuns be places where they put prisoners, and the guy just laughed at me. He just bust out laughing because that wasn't an academic take. And I stood there leaning on my shovel, and I looked at him and I said, okay, Bob, these are complex societies. You tell me what they did with their prisoners. What they do with their prisoners. People who broke the laws or the, whatever moral codes they had, what they do with them.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't answer me.
Right.
So why is my theory so out there and so funny? If I mentioned this ball game hero theory to some Mesoamerican academics, they laugh at me too.
Well, we know
say, why would they put such effort into carving stones of sports heroes? And then I'd say, because we are not much different from what they are. And they prized sports heroes just like the Romans did, just like we do. They're more important than the priests and rulers. And it took a lot of effort to carve these statues or these heads. Like in La Venta, there were 4 that were discovered in that site. And the closest place to source the basalt to make those heads is 50 miles away, across jungles, 2 major rivers. How'd they get this stuff to the city? How'd they get these gigantic, sometimes 9-foot tall blocks of stone? How'd they get them to the place? It took a lot of effort.
And by the way, it's a bit of a false choice. But first, we know that the Comanche did exactly what you suggest. They had pits for prisoners. Sometimes that was like the isolation cells. But the other thing is, all through history, listen, people are people, and we have certain archetypes. And if you believed Carl Jung, that we're all wired sort of the same way. And the athletes and the nobility are not necessarily 2 distinct classes. The knights that jousted were nobility. They were nobles. The original Olympics for the Greeks, they were the nobility, often children of nobility. And if they weren't, they became nobles damn quick, because celebrity culture is celebrity culture. So it's not even like it has to be a false choice. If you just look around the world, who else had the time to train for these sort of obscure things other than the wealthy, who didn't really have to do anything else? Everyone else is busy farming and gardening and hunting and fishing and doing others. They're not training to be athletes. Today in America, the U.S. Olympic Committee, there's giant facilities that they have donors and endowments and things like that. And yes, are those people the nobility? No, but probably if you're a great skier, either you were discovered by accident as a prodigy, or you came from a wealthy family that could afford to have you skiing from the time you were 3 years old on, because skiing is not a poor person's endeavor. Neither is tennis. That's why the Williams sisters story is so amazing. Now, they weren't poor. I believe they were middle class. I'm sorry, I didn't watch that movie. But that's the breakthrough. Golf is a rich man's game for the most part. So there's just parallels now. So again, those people who are scoffing at you or others, why? What's the big distinction? I understand the gladiators weren't the nobility. They were captured people. They were slaves, basically. But in many, if not most cases, your athletic competitions were engaged upon by your nobles. All right, there goes my little rant.
And it's hard to tell. I don't know if we'll ever really know. So, but yeah, you made some really good points there.
Thanks.
It's not necessarily mutually exclusive. They could have been nobles also, in addition to being really good ball players.
That's all I'm trying to say, Robert. So do we know anything about their gods and their mythology? Do we know, did they have a pantheon similar to the Mayans, who seem to pick up the baton from them, or the Aztecs later, or someone else? Is there, if at all, is it maybe more, comparable to, I don't know, Babylon?
Well, we don't know a whole lot about their belief systems, once again, because of the age and the lack of written materials. However, we do have artifacts, and we have artistic representations like murals and stone carvings and things like that. The oldest representation of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god that is found throughout Mesoamerica, was at La Venta. And as I mentioned before, La Venta dates from about 800 BC to 400 BC, more like 900 BC to 400 BC, the 500-year period. So in those centuries BC, we have that appearance of that feathered serpent god that just explodes throughout every other culture found there. So we see that there. We see a lot of what they call zoomorphs, like blends of animals and people, like the were-jaguar and even baby were-jaguars.
Ooh.
There are a lot of figurines, and even one of the monuments in La Venta, one of the major cities of the Olmecs, there's a big altar in the front of the altar, there's a figurine emerging from a cave, or maybe the mouth of a beast, they think, and he's holding a limp baby were-jaguar. Nobody knows what that means. They think maybe the altar was used to sacrifice kids, or it could have been a throne. No one knows. There's a lot of interpretation, and some of that interpretation is backtracked. We see what the Maya or the Toltecs or the Aztecs were doing, and we see some sort of similarities in the Olmec area, and we step it back. We say, okay, the Olmecs probably believe this because 1,000 years later, the Maya were using the same symbols and the same imagery, and this is what we know they believed.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to go back, trace it back, and use our best guesses to try to figure things out. But as far as like a pantheon goes, there hasn't been one that's been reconstructed. We just know that certain things, like I was saying, the feathered serpent and the were-jaguar and baby were-jaguar were important. And then the mix of these people with animals.
Right.
So, but we don't know what to make of it all.
So we know there was definitely lore, maybe legend. We don't know if that was religious or not, though there's a high likelihood if you put that kind of effort into something that it was religious, but maybe not. Maybe that's just how the artist class, the nerd class, the geekdom, the comic book people express themselves. Maybe they were sculptors. I don't know, but I guess when we borrow from the more recent peoples with more history that we can confirm, and using sort of similar characters as gods that we can at least say, not safely, but with some certainty, think that they were likely some sort of pantheon. But we don't know the eschatology or the creation story or anything like that. But we can maybe take from the Maya and the Aztec and see the similarities, and extrapolate that perhaps that was the Olmecs origin stories and their beliefs. But I guess we really don't. For all we know, they were monotheists or stoic atheists, and just were afraid of jaguars, which probably is smart. I'm afraid of jaguars too.
Yeah, with good reason.
Yeah. Don't jaguars have the strongest jaws in animaldom, or at least of mammals?
Yeah, I don't know. Wow. Yeah. But I wouldn't want to come across one of them, that's for sure.
Yeah, I know they have the strongest jaws of felines. I'm not sure if they have stronger jaws than a crocodile or I was going to say octopus, hippopotamus. Yeah, they definitely have stronger jaws than an octopus. That I can say for certain. On that fact, I'm certain. That's the most certain I've been about anything on this show so far, is that the jaguar has stronger jaws than an octopus. Well, watch this. Tomorrow the Kraken shows up and says, "You're wrong!" Bites my head off. That you know what? That would be an epic way to go. That the Kraken actually comes and chooses me. That is the absolute most fitting end to Garden of Doom, besides the end of the show Dinosaurs. All right, so what more do we know about the Olmec, or really is there anything else that we know about the Olmec?
Well, they had an influence. We know they had an influence outside their heartland. There were trading posts or other settlements that were very far away as Guatemala. Even.
Wow.
In fact, one of the 17 heads was found in Guatemala, in a region near the Pacific coast, near a region called Soconusco or Soconusco. There are like 4 different ways to pronounce this name. It straddles the Mexico-Guatemala border. It was an ancient region that was highly prized all the way up to the Aztecs. The Aztecs had a colony that far away, and they controlled Soconusco. And the reason why is because in all the world, that place has the highest concentration of cacao trees. They grow naturally, they grow like weeds, and that was prized as a currency by the Maya, by the Aztecs. Aztecs have extensive records of that being used to pay tribute. Even the people in the Olmec land, when the Aztecs conquered that region of ancient Mexico, they paid Tenochtitlan in tribute in rubber and also cacao beans. So that the Olmecs had a big trade network that we know of that extended as far away as Guatemala, hundreds of miles away.
Do you have any idea what's so special about cacao? I mean, when you say cacao beans to me, I remember that's like supposed to be the healthier, not quite as delicious chocolate.
Yeah, it's bare bones chocolate. We make chocolate out of the cacao beans. But when the Spanish arrived, they were used as currency. Even in the Maya area, which had already collapsed from their high civilization. So that was a very prized area, that part of Mexico, Guatemala, Soconusco. And the Olmecs may have had a colony there, or at least trading posts. And they had trading posts. Their influence is found in other parts of Mexico too, but not like the heartland. So it's like having an embassy or something, or a trading post.
Oh, well, it sounds like they stuck mostly to the coast, even as far as, I guess from where you're describing to where Guatemala is. It's like 2,000 miles.
It's pretty far. Yeah, it's really far. And you remember, no pack animals, no wheel. So, it was all overland.
That's right. There were no horses in North America, which means there were no donkeys, and certainly. Right. There was a North American horse, but they were long extinct by this time.
Eohippus. It was like a dog. It was like the size of a dog, but that was extinct a long time ago.
And I think North American camels were long extinct, and I think that the llamas and alpacas they're much further south. So there's no mule, there's no donkey. I don't even know if there were goats or pigs, but those are not really pack animals.
No, they carried everything on their backs. And the good thing, though, about cacao beans is they don't weigh anything.
That's true.
So you could pack a whole bunch of them. So it's a lot of wealth you have on your back.
Right.
But they did trade. There is evidence of Olmec settlements or an Olmec presence in different parts of Mexico at the time, beyond their heartland.
Wow.
And does that indicate an empire? We don't know.
Yeah, or just a influential. Listen, the Vikings are known for conquering, but it's more like raiding. But they had trading outposts all over the place, and I don't think anyone ever really talks about a Viking empire, except maybe in a short time in Britain and Ireland, maybe. I don't think there was anyone in Iceland or Greenland when they got there, though there might have been Inuit, but anyway.
The Skraelings.
Ooh, the Skraelings. Yes.
The Skraelings, in Greenland and Finland, I guess, they called the natives the Skraelings.
No, I'm sure the Skraelings didn't call themselves the Skraelings. They probably didn't. They probably called the Vikings the Skraelings or the smelly, ugly guys. But that's entirely different. Actually, I think I might have touched on that with other people, but probably more from the Viking perspective. So I probably need to get the opposite perspective some time if I can. By the way, I think there is a curse against me and North American First Nation shows, because every time I have a guest on that, they either disappear or need to reschedule or have a legit problem.
Really?
Yeah, it's weird because I hear people talk to me all the time about they're having technical problems, they can never get their show off the air, or they can't talk about this and whatever. And I'm always like, come on, it's just a coincidence. But now it's like I realize I'm the subject of this same curse. I mean, I found a shaman. He came on the show once, but we really didn't get into it. And then he disappeared. And then someone else led me to another shaman he disappeared. And then a friend of mine was going to talk on the Ojibwe, and he has to reschedule, but we haven't rescheduled yet. He will. And then my good friend Reverend Jim Williams, who's been on the show many times, he did 3 recorded, doing it in the traditional way with the right music and the right drums and whatever, but he has to reschedule, and obviously he's been on the show so many times, I absolutely believe he will, and it was a real emergency. But the commonality is not them and what's happening to them. The commonality is me. The curse is upon me.
Well, you better figure that out.
Yeah, I
guess. Figure out why.
I don't. You know what? I don't know. I've done so many bad things that though I don't think any of them were necessarily to the First Nations. But I mean, when they built that house, in Poltergeist, I don't think they knew what they were doing either. Or at least the buyers didn't know. So, but this is one of the famous meanderings of the Garden of Doom. So, all right. So the Olmec, we're not sure if they were an empire, but they were certainly influential, at least in a trading. And, obviously artistic, and possibly if not probably, in some sort of religious connotations as well. Why do you think that the Olmec have made it into history sort of as this legendary, again, sprang from nowhere, disappeared? I mean, no one comes from nowhere and no one disappears into nothingness. I mean, do we have nothing where, there's no end story, there's no conquering, did they just, is there any, I guess, the lack of writing, we don't know if there was infighting or a revolution, or if they just, sort of Neanderthal themselves by interbreeding with the other people and sort of being absorbed into their maybe they were peaceful. They resolved their issues in that sporting field instead of war. And so, when actual warriors came, they sort of just got absorbed.
Well, yeah, we don't know what happened with the Olmec or the Maya civilization. Both of those civilizations collapsed, and we're still scratching our heads trying to figure out why.
It's not the Phoenicians, is it? The Phoenicians are blamed for everything.
I'm sorry?
The Phoenicians, everything. The answer to everything is the Phoenicians or the Sea Peoples.
Okay, yeah, right, okay. Or aliens, right? But the Olmecs didn't come out of nowhere the way people say they did usually, because there is such a thing as, like I was saying earlier, the epi-Olmec, the pre-Olmec, and they were just farmers who settled down, and then things got more complex and more stratified, etc., and so on, and then we have the Olmec civilization. It was built on, very humble farming beginnings and having to deal with irrigation or other problems. And the civilization collapsed around 400 BC, and then 200 years later we see the rise of the Maya, and then the same thing repeats itself. And we see this all over the world. It's nothing new. And you hear, it's happening to us now. The American empire is coming to an end. We hear that Western civilization is about to collapse. At least, I've been hearing that for the past 35 years. Mm-hmm. So the dollar will collapse, this will collapse, whatever. But that is a truth that civilizations do end, or they collapse or a certain form of collapse and morph and change into something else or whatever. And that's what we see in ancient Mexico too. It's no different.
Little editorial.
But we just don't know why.
Yeah, little editorial here. Until people can actually define and agree what Western civilization is, you cannot convince me that it's collapsing. Because I think that some people consider that to be a majority, if not super majority, white Christian civilization, and that the beginnings of Western civilization predate their being Christianity. So listen, maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, I agree with you. I think the dollar is just fine, and if you want to hear more about my politics, you can find it. Unfortunately, occasionally on this show, but more likely on Garden Views, where we actually talk more about geopolitics and legal and tech and science and things like that. Cheap plug right there. So the Olmec did not come from nothing. We know that they came from something, and it seems like everyone, there's this whole myth that they were hunter-gatherers, and then at some point, after the Great Floods, people, all over the world shifted to agrarianism, and that's not the case. I mean, some people did, some people didn't. There was some transition. Some did a little bit of both, and probably what happened is it got passed along, and as people realized that, we can get wealthy if we sit here on this land. They probably found other things on the land or whatever. It got more and more popular, but we still have hunter-gathering. I mean, everyone's pretending like we did. We're just hunting and gathering for different things: wealth, power, prestige, clout, whatever. I mean, and because we have other people doing the hunting and gathering in these things called ranches. Or
fishing boats.
And fisheries and farms and fishery ranches and whatever else is. I mean, we've just trapped our food in giant zoo prisons. So anyway, enough about that. But that has little to do with the Olmec, I suppose. But their downfall is interesting. But there's the Bronze Age sort of collapsed, and no one's exactly sure why. So they are certainly not the only civilization to rise to some prominence and then disappear. And at the time, I'm sure people knew exactly why it happened, or the confluence of events that happened. It's just nobody was writing it down. There wasn't a full language. It sounds like there were more like symbols that represented things like granary, exchange, governor, or king. It sounds like they were more like just the rudiments of written language.
And when people think of collapse, they think that all of a sudden people just abandon things like overnight.
Yeah, like Atlantis or Pompeii or something.
I'm living in San Diego right now, and there was a net loss in population last year for this city because it's so expensive here. The politics are weird, all of these things. A lot of people are throwing their hands up in the air going, I'm done with this place, I'm leaving. So then they're moving to Kansas or South Dakota or Texas or some small town in New Mexico or whatever. And maybe is San Diego in the beginning of a collapse? Possibly. I mean, when you have all these people leaving, it's a slow process, I think. Yeah. And it could have been extremely slow with a lot of these places taking 100 or 200 years. And it could be just people saying, I'm out of here. I'm done. I'm fed up with this.
Right.
And as things get more complex, people talk about entropy, and I don't believe in that necessarily because, as you keep living, things don't get easier and they don't break down. They're getting more complex. I mean, think about this. We're on Riverside. Well, 5-10 years ago, there was just Skype. And then now there's all these features and you can download this app. I'm looking at the screen here and this looks different than the screen that I pulled up the last time we talked. And there's now you can add this app to go with this. Things get so complex and people just throw their hands up in the air and say, I don't need this anymore. Right. And maybe that's what has happened in these ancient civilizations. Things got so weird and so complex, and the pressure was on, and people had to work so much or whatever, and they said, and those people over the mountains over there, they're just living this peaceful life, and all they're doing is farming and fishing. Forget this La Venta stuff, and forget the king, and forget all of this stuff that we have to pay him and do all this. Well, I'm going over there.
Yeah,
so,
and with
I don't know, it could be a simple explanation like that. And you get a lot of people doing that. What if half of this city of San Diego decides to throw up their hands in the air and go, I'm out of here?
Well, hi.
The city would.
I'm from Baltimore.
Not the same.
From the time I moved to Baltimore in August of 1990 to now, the population is almost half. I think when I first moved here, it was around 900,000. At last count, it was a little bit over 500,000. So, San Diego, I don't know, but I guess one of the good things about people moving out is that things get less expensive, and then things happen again. You got a good location, but I think your point is well taken in there. That if people were not thrilled with the leadership or their role in life and their fortunes, there's no pack animals, there's no roads, there's no cars. But so probably if you walked 20 or 30 miles away, or, maybe I'm being oversimplified. Maybe if you went, 100 miles, depending on which direction you went, if you went on the coast or if you went inland, it's probably very different. But you completely got out from under the authority of which you didn't like, and maybe they would visit. They'd have their embassy or their trade routes would go in, but then all of a sudden you had the tavern or the inn and the flea market where they needed you. They stopped there. They came to you for hospitality, and you could make a profit off of that, and then the town arose around you, and then it got. It was diffused. It got fused by diffusion, and then you no longer had an empire. You had just a small, loosely related confederation of trade towns. So that got lost to history, but certainly not lost in real time. I mean, the people are still there. I mean, if those giant statues of heads and the people in Tabasco that basically look like them are, do have that actual resemblance. And you sent me pictures, and in fact, they do. I mean, it's right there.
They didn't go far.
Yeah. I mean, they're still there. They're right there. So, the Olmec is still there. They just maybe don't realize that they are Olmec because there's no DNA for Olmec as of yet. I mean, maybe one day someone will find the right archaeologist will find the treasure trove or something of a tomb or something, or a mass grave or whatever, and more pieces will come together.
It's interesting that you say that, because there hasn't been any DNA recovered from these sites because of the nature of the environment. They're the tropics.
Wet, yeah.
All of the decomposition and everything, there's nothing that scientists can grab a hold of to analyze. The only way we know what they look like was from the artistic representations that still survive. But all human remains are completely gone. And they've discovered many tombs. Many elaborate tombs exist in La Venta, those that weren't looted. That site was just overrun by looters. That's a big problem with the Olmec, is that more has been looted from these sites than has been recovered by archaeologists, so that really inhibits our understanding. But as far as skeletal remains and DNA, it's just not there because of the environment that these places are in.
Yeah, I mean, that was the big deal with King Tut's tomb, is that it wasn't looted. They actually found a body in there. Everywhere else, the Valley of the Kings, and I mean, they have these giant sites, basically, lots of good stuff here. Come here if you want to raid. And people say, the pyramids weren't tombs. They've never found a body there. There's actually written records of the people who were in charge of these things, regrettably talking to pharaohs and people in power saying, Yeah, they got robbed. We tried to we salvaged what we could, and then we put it into this one place up here in the Valley of the Kings, and then that one place 100 years later got robbed, and like, yeah, sorry, we can't. They couldn't afford to keep guards there, and they couldn't guard an entire valley. I mean, but the difference with the Egyptians, and I keep talking about the Egyptians because there's so many parallels. I mean, people like to say the Egyptians taught the Olmecs and the Egyptians were taught by the Atlanteans. But the main difference between the Egyptians and the Olmecs is that the Egyptians kept detailed written records there. Even if you look at their religion, it is so bureaucratic and administrative. I mean, they kept records on everything. They signed everything. You knew exactly what it was. We know who the first architect was, Imhotep. And then the Imhotep was there was Imhotep the 97th by the time they were done. So, I mean, it's all in. People's like, we don't know the technology they used to build the pyramids. Yes, we do. They told us. They drew pictures of it. They recorded how many rocks and where the quarries were from and what quarries not to use and what quarries to use. And I mean, they told. It's like if you revere Egypt, believe the Egyptians. They told us everything. They told us what their population was. They told us what the makeup of the peoples were. They told us where they built things, why they built things, when they moved. Everything. I mean, rivaled only by the Babylonians and then later the Romans in that regard. So anyway, I'm not sure what else you can tell me about the Olmec or us, but this is free reign as we get right up to the around the 1 hour mark.
Well, there's a lot left to be discovered, and there's a lot, I think, that we can learn from repatriation. There are so many artifacts that are outside of Mexico right now for the Olmecs. I'd say they're probably more outside the country of Mexico than inside the country of Mexico. Whether it's repatriation or studying in these artifacts in these various museums, there are a lot of museums throughout the world that have Olmec pieces, and they don't even know what they have. And so there's a lot that needs to be studied, I think, from what's already out there, and then what we can uncover at these sites. The Mexican government hasn't done a very good job protecting these sites. Specifically La Venta. It's like I said, it was so looted. When the archaeologists came back in the 50s, there were a lot of digs in the early 40s at this site. And then they came up with the whole idea of Olmec once they were able to date these places, because then they saw that, no, these aren't Maya because they predate the Maya by 1,000 years, right? So, but the Mexican government hasn't been very good at protecting these sites. Specifically, La Venta, this big site that was the main powerhouse for 500 years. All the looting that went on, even in the 60s, Pemex, the national oil company, started drilling in the southern end of this site, in the southern end of the city, and just totally trashed all of these artifacts that they found and everything. And if you go there today, you see the old oil equipment and stuff just scattered about. And yeah, so there's a lot that needs to be preserved and studied and researched. And I don't know, it seems like the Mexican government's putting the Olmecs on the back burner. The Maya and the Aztecs and the Toltecs get a lot more attention than these people for some reason.
Maybe just because more information has survived. I don't know, but the lucky thing for you and I is that the Mayans are going to be our next stop, and I guess after that will be the Toltecs. So anyway, before I stop, because just because we're at an hour mark, it's just a road sign. There's nothing magic about it here on the Garden of Doom. Most of the shows go longer than an hour, some much longer. Is there any legend or story of the Olmec that I didn't ask you about or you didn't have a chance to talk about that should absolutely be told?
No, not really. I mean, because so little is known about, what what they believed in. Like I said, we can only really assume based on later cultures. So, yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any legends. The name Olmec, I didn't mention this. The name Olmec comes from Nahuatl, which is the Aztec language, and it means the rubber people. And it didn't apply to the ancient civilization in the Aztec times. It applied to the people currently living in those areas that were considered the Olmec heartland. So it was a 14th century name that was given to the people of the Gulf lowlands because they supplied the major Aztec cities, the empire, with the rubber to make the balls for the ball game.
Right. You mentioned earlier. Yeah, you mentioned earlier there are a lot of rubber trees there. It's not because these people were Gumby.
Right.
I'm Gumby, damn it.
The origin of Gumby comes from the Gulf Coast of Mexico.
Right. The secret of the Olmec revealed. They're a race of Gumbies. So there you go.
Yeah, so the rubber people. Yeah, literally the rubber people. So then when the archaeologists said, hey, we have a new civilization, what do we call it? Then they deferred to the Aztec name for more modern peoples.
Sure.
Because, the Olmec civilization was there, almost 2,000 years before the Aztecs. So that's the origin of the name Olmec. But back to what you were saying about legends, it would be really interesting to know all of this stuff about what they believed in and what stories they had. But there's really no way of knowing, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, you can make them up and write a book or something. All right. Well, good.
I think someone did that with the Toltecs. What could that be?
I don't know. We'll find out.
For another show.
Yeah. Was it Graham Hancock? That's just a guess.
No.
No. Okay. All right. All right. Then we'll save it. We'll save it for the Toltec show.
Okay.
All right. Very good. All right. So I know that you do want to be found and followed. You already mentioned your books, but you can certainly mention it again. So if people want to find and follow you and buy your stuff, tell them where they can find and follow you and what wonderful things they can buy.
Okay, well, the starting point would be MexicoUnexplained.com. And then there you can get free transcripts of past shows that I've done. You can read and listen there. And from there, you can jump off. There are links to YouTube, to TikTok, to, all the social media stuff. And you can also purchase autographed and personalized copies of the books at MexicoUnexplained.com. You can also order from Amazon, and with the ISB number, you can go to your local bookstore and order it through them too. But the main nexus of all of this stuff is MexicoUnexplained.com. That's like the starting point if you want to learn more. And, everything is easily searchable. If you wanted to look up Olmec, I think I have probably like 8 or 9 shows. I'm on show number 382 now.
Wow.
And then I have hundreds of shorts out there because that's what people are into now, unfortunately. They want 40-second clips. Someone the other day on TikTok complained that my short was too long and I wasn't speaking fast enough. And I said, for goodness sakes, it's 53 seconds long. But I'm on TikTok because that's a big draw for people to come and see the real meaty stuff that I offer on MexicoUnexplained.com.
Well, we've now highlighted once again why I remain and shall always be a failure, because there's no way I can do anything short, and there's practically nothing I can do in 40 seconds except maybe the small cheeseburger. And I'm not going to go on TikTok because I don't use Chinese spyware. I stick to good old American spyware. So you got all of Robert's information, all the stuff. Definitely follow his stuff. Check it out. He does shorts, so maybe you'll like that better than me. I do longs. And for those of you who like this show, and I hope you do, subscribe to Garden of Doom. You get Garden Views. And you can give a 5-star rating and a nice little review and tell your friends. I really do believe that telling your friends is more important. But I don't mind if you go to like your friends and your relatives' phones and you type in Garden of Doom and you hit subscribe for them. I mean, consider paying your phone. Consider giving them a gift. Or at least me a gift. And, listen, my birthday was just a few months ago. I think I got like one present. So, I'm due. All right. Thank you to our guest, Robert. I think this is your 4th appearance on the show. We will actually set a date for the Mayan show, and then we will set a date for the Toltec show. And we are always happy to have you back. We're glad that we made your acquaintance through that podcastguest.com, which is a pretty cool little service, for nothing, for free. And so, giving away trade secrets here, because I'm a generous soul. Anyway, thanks to Robert again. Thanks to all of you for listening, and we will hear from you, or you'll hear from us again. I keep getting that backwards. I am just not a good broadcaster. You will hear from us again next week in the Garden of Doom, and possibly midweek, for a Garden Views as well. See y'all.